Hello and welcome to Thrive Holistic Health and Fitness. This seminar is Keep On Running, How to Run Stronger for Longer and Banish Injuries by Christian O'Hare. I'm a holistic health and fitness coach, and one of my specialities is biomechanics in sports and injuries rehab. Now, I've played rugby for 35 years and I'm only 5'9", 90 kilos. So I've been one of the smallest guys on the pitch. So I've had my fair share of injuries over that time. But I've learned to be able to rehab myself effectively and keep my biomechanics in a good state so that it can help my performance as I've gone forwards. And in the gym, I often spend a lot of my time stretching, mobilizing, maintaining the integrity of my tissues in the body to allow me to have good form to then go out. And post rugby career, I've got into trail running, mountain biking, I've done the London Marathon, numerous half marathons, etc. So if you look after yourself, you'll get a lot of longevity and a lot of performance out of the body. And that's what this seminar is about. How to maintain yourself, and we're going to look at the 12 standards about how to do that. So the history of man and his ability to run. From man to survive, thrive, and spread across the world, he or she has had to be able to run. So they ran to eat, ran to avoid being eaten, ran to find a mate, and then ran away with each other. So if you didn't run, you probably didn't live long. Now, persistence hunting has been around for thousands of years in the evolution of man, and it involves chasing after an animal for long distances until the prey exhausts itself. Now, the San people of the Kalahari Desert were still practicing this hunting method in the early 2000s. So it shows you that our anatomy gave us our first weapon, and we were born to run. And how does that anatomy work? So we've got the 5 running weapons. So we've got your springs, we've got stable springy arches, super elastic Achilles tendons, a powerful butt, ear canals for pinpoint guidance. So with the springs in the feet, when you're walking, your feet, legs and body use a pendulum motion. But when we start to run, the sling system comes alive in the body. So that's the muscular system and the fascial system. And we can use gravity as elastic energy or kinetic energy to bounce you along with amazing efficiency. And running is only about 30 to 50% more costly than walking at endurance pace. It's extremely efficient when done properly. And if you look at this diagram here with the arches of the foot, we've got A, B and C points. So that's like a spring system if the foot is maintained properly. So the foot needs to have a bit of integrity with that system. So if the arches are collapsed, there's no more spring left in that system. So we can rebuild them doing specific toe reanimator exercises. So the stable springy arches reduce energy costs by about 17%. So they're exceptionally efficient. So that people who don't have these arches and are running, they're going to have to put a lot more effort in to get the same amount of performance out. You just don't have that spring system. Now, the super elastic Achilles tendons are believed to release about 35% of that mechanical energy produced. But the same doesn't happen when you walk, it's only when we run. Now, your butt muscles, probably the largest muscles in the body, and generally stabilization and power going through that posterior chain of the body is essential to drive us forward. But if you're sitting all day, this can ruin the function of them. Or if you are lacking them or lacking training them in the gym as well, that will reduce their functionality and assistance with running. Now, our ear canals for pinpoint guidance. So they're like gyroscopic computers which relay information to the musculoskeletal system, and that allows micro adjustments to running movement patterns, and running technique is all important, as you know. So in this video, it shows the walking gait cycle, how we use a pendulum effect with the heel striking first, rolling through the foot, and it's definitely a pendulum-like motion that we have. When you contrast the walking gait cycle with the running gait cycle, it's a very different strategy that the body uses for an elastic spring system. So our running anatomy, we already mentioned the muscle sling system. So in the body, no muscles work in isolation. They always work together in chains. So a top tip here is that if you're in the gym and you're training, it's ideal for you to train the slings of the body, the different sling systems that we have, rather than maybe the traditional bodybuilding type exercises where you're using isolation techniques. Swiss balls are also great for stability exercises. Cable machines for rotational exercises are both excellent options for working these sling systems. So you can see that the slings complement one side of the body and the other side of the body, and that's where our balance technique comes from and our ability to run smoothly. The fascial system of the body, as you can see, covers the length and breadth, so it's all over our bodies. Now, we often get restrictions in these muscle systems or fascial systems where it's muscle tear or previous injury with scar tissue. Also, dehydration can affect the system, and we can get adhesions that don't allow the sliding surfaces to work properly. So if you imagine riding a bike with the brakes on, that's what it's like having these restrictions in the muscles and the fascia in the body. And remember that running is a whole body event, so all these systems need to be in good form. But probably the most important thing is our mindset. So runners often have a mindset around task completion, and also that goes for many gym goers as well, but especially runners. They're great at completing the task, whatever it takes. However, there is a price to pay for this as well. So if you're training for an event and you're doggedly sticking to a schedule rather than listening to your own body, this can often result in injuries, and it's often lacking effective self-management, including paying attention to rest and recovery cycles, physical therapy, getting adequate nutrition, sleep, hydration, etc. So we've got to pay attention to what's going on inside the body before we then go out and do, say, a 10-mile run. So if you're really not feeling like it and the body's tired, you've got aching muscles, don't just stick to the plan. Maybe just have a rest day, go out the following day once you've done a little bit of rest and recovery and maybe mobilizing some of those tight muscles so that you can go out and put a decent training session in rather than a junk training session, because those junk miles won't do you any favors in the long term. So if you're training for an event and you've been putting junk miles in, what condition are you going to be in during the day of the event? So many runners are broken due to their training schedules rather than paying attention to what's going on the inside. So as a runner, you've finished your event, maybe it's a marathon or half marathon, but at what price? How was your technique? What injuries sustained? What was your performance like? Now, if you consider that there's on average 33,000 steps for a marathon, and about 90% of marathon runners have some sort of issue, and consider 3 out of 4 runners get at least one running related injury per year. Now, these generally come from poor postural positions, restricted ranges of movements in the joints, muscles, and also habitual poor movement patterns. So you may finish, but what state will you be in? We want you to be able to support your body with a new mindset. So this includes having an effective warm-up and cool down for your systems before you go out and run, how well you run each mile, cooling down effectively, work ergonomics, so whether you're sitting, standing, or whatever position you're in for many hours throughout the day, and do you counter any poor movement patterns with effective maintenance work? Do you hydrate and nutrition adequately? So in my experience with most runners, they love to run, they don't generally love to gym or stretch or roll or take good care of themselves other than loving to go out for a run. And that's fine, but sooner or later you're going to come unstuck and probably have some injuries. So my recommendation is just to spend a few minutes every time you go out, just to make sure that you're warming up the tissues, you're identifying any problem areas before you go out, and having an effective warm-up prior to your run. Now, when we're running, how well do you run each mile? So technique is everything. So think about if you're in the gym and you're lifting a bar, doing some reps, and your technique is poor. Well, because you're lifting a heavy bar, chances are that you may well injure yourself. You're going to derail your technique. So your technique next time is going to be that little bit off. So that's going to reduce in the possibility of having increased injuries and also reduced performance, reduced results. So we've got to get that technique right. And when you consider if you apply that to running, how many reps you do when you're running as opposed to in the gym, you've got many more reps, and that magnifies any imbalances that you have. So if you can't do it right, don't do it at all. Otherwise, you're going to retrain the system with poor movement patterns. So the smart thing to do is to walk, recover, then get going again with proper technique. Remember, this is not your race, so it doesn't matter if you're getting fatigued and you stop and have a walk. This is training, and we only want to train with good technique. We want good inputs into the body. So when you've got good technique and you build up the stamina, maybe it takes a little bit longer, but you're going to be able to run longer with less energy used, and that's going to increase your performance. Now with the cool down, this is largely overlooked. Very often people go out, they hammer a run for an hour, and then they're straight back home into work, sitting at a desk or sitting in the car, etc. You need to take at least a few minutes to gradually cool down from the run. Then do the adequate stretches, loosen up if you've got any hot spots or niggles that you had on the run, to deal with those as well, so that you recover quicker, ready for the next session. Work ergonomics as well is essential, because if you don't control your environment, it will control you. So we've got to get those work ergonomics right. Maintenance, so we can use various equipment and techniques, stretching, mobilizing, band work, ball work, etc., to make sure that we're keeping any aches, pains at bay and keeping the muscles supple and maintaining the integrity of the system. Hydration is important for the gliding surfaces. So we already mentioned about the sling system for the muscles, the fascial system, we've got the skin as well, and all of these systems need to slide across each other. If you're dehydrated, it's very difficult for them to do that. So if you imagine your muscles, when they're dehydrated, look like beef jerky. When they're fully hydrated, they're going to look a bit more like fillet steak. And the fillet steak muscles is what we're after. Food for energy. So if you don't eat right according to your metabolic type, that's the balance of carbs, fats, proteins, and getting that right, then you're going to have poor energy while you're running and also poor recovery. So it's essential to get the nutrition right. So really, we want to focus on technique, quality training, remove the junk miles that don't serve you. Now, let me introduce you to the 12 standards. So here they are. So we're going to run through each one of these. Now, if you are able to achieve any level of success in these 12 standards, it will offer you pain-free running, more speed, more endurance, faster race times with less energy burned, and a bit of longevity in your sport as well. And ultimately, you're going to gain performance. So standard number 1, ideally we've got to be in neutral. So we've got to get our biomechanics right from a starting point. So you can do a home test So just stand in front of the mirror with bare feet, march on the spot for about 20-30 seconds, and then stop and review your feet position. If you're not in neutral, you're going to be getting an energy leak, you're going to be wearing out tissues and joints, increased risk of injuries, and also your performance will reduce as well. Standard 2, flat shoes versus conventional. So we spoke earlier about that elastic spring system in the foot. Now, if we wear traditional shoes, it allows us to have a heel strike, but that doesn't allow us to use the spring system in the body. So we're using the shoe to do what the foot should do. So there's believed to be an incidence in higher injuries when you're wearing these type of thicker shoes, which allows you to heel strike, because the body isn't designed to run on its heel. And a simple way to demonstrate this is if you stand up, now jump up and down, landing on your heels, and see how that feels through the body. You can tell that there is no spring system in operation there. Now transfer to the balls of your feet, now bounce up and down. And you should notice it's a lot smoother, there's a lot more spring, and you can actually feel that elastic recoil or the kinetic energy going through the system. So if we can, we need to avoid those thicker shoes with the heel, which allow the heel strike, get into the thinner shoes, flat sole shoes, or zero drop they're called, which pushes us further forwards onto our forefoot, and that's going to allow you to use the body as it's meant to be used, and hopefully will reduce injuries going forwards. It can take a little bit of time for you to build up your miles once running from the heel to the forefoot, so you want to just take this gently. A couple of do's and don'ts about foot mechanics and Achilles tendons is try and avoid wearing high heels, because that will wind up the tension in the calf muscles. It's like switching them on constantly. And flip-flops as well, so they're particularly bad for you, especially where plantar fasciitis is concerned, because the muscle that's under goes from the big toe right the way under the sole of the foot to the heel. The hallucis brevis is responsible for plantar fasciitis issues, and that's the muscle that gets wound up very tight when we're wearing flip-flops, as the toes have got to contract to hold the shoe in place. Something like Birkenstocks, though, with a toe bar seem to work much better. So that's a simple switch. So just make sure we're doing our mobility exercises as well, because sometimes if the foot's got become very inflexible because of the thicker shoes, we're going to need to do some plantar mobilizations, some toe grips, toe reanimators, and also work through the calf muscles as well to mobilize those. So shoes are great to get in. The zero drop shoes are great to get into, but we're probably also going to have to do some mobility exercises as well. So the running shoe industry is believed to be worth about $3 billion a year. Now, if you go into a typical running shop that sells running shoes, they have a huge variety. What they generally get you to do is to get on the treadmill, and then they'll say to you, okay, well, you're a mild, severe, or excessive pronator, and here's the shoe to go with that. But this is more about the science of marketing than it is the science of injury prevention. Now, essentially, if you've got an arch that has collapsed and you support it from underneath, then the foot's just going to get weaker and weaker because it's not having to do the work. So you're ultimately going to have to wear those shoes for the rest of your life to support the arch. Or you can get some zero drop shoes, walk around barefoot and do some toe exercises to help re-establish that arch yourself. And the arches that they put into the shoes essentially just push the problem elsewhere in the body. Now, author Christopher McDougall, who wrote the book Born to Run, which is fantastic, by the way, I'd highly recommend it, contacted all the major shoe manufacturers to provide evidence that their shoes do what they say. None of them replied with any evidence. And the US military did massive studies and basically concluded that these shoes don't work. So you can draw your own conclusion on that and maybe try out some thinner shoes with the zero drop or close to that. and see how they work for you. So I found these shoes online for only €359. These shoes will do the same thing as your foot will do naturally. What a bargain. So we want to try and get into a normal foot shape. So the foot is narrow at the heel and then gets wider across the ball of the foot, and the shoes should reflect that. However, most shoes are pretty much designed like foot coffins. They're very tight, squeezing the width of the foot, the arch together, and also compressing the toes with the points at the top. Now here's two pairs of shoes from companies called Vibram Five Fingers and Vivo. I've used both of these extensively, and these are fantastic shoes for helping to re-establish the normal mechanics in the feet. Now, when you consider that the natural foot is wide, it's flexible, and it's sensory, and it has about 200,000 nerve endings and is a sensory organ for a reason. 70% of our brain's movement information comes from our feet, 10% from our eyes, and 20% from our inner ears. The part of the brain that gets information from the feet is the same size as the part of the brain that gets information from the hands. Take away this feedback from the foot and it gets confused, resulting in unskillful movements that can lead to pain and injury. Now, tests were done on foot strike force plates. Now, the testers found that the thicker the shoe's sole, the higher the force on the plate. So the theory is that the body's looking for feedback to enable performance. So if you put a big chunk of rubber in the way, it has to hit harder to get the input of sensory information it needs. So the thinner the shoe, generally, the lighter we're running, the more of the muscular sling system, that elastic recoil that we're using, and less pressure. So it probably results in less injuries as well. But there's only one way to try this, and that's get yourself a pair of zero drop shoes and get some miles in and see how they work out for you. Standard 3, supple thoracic spine. So Serge Grakovetsky in The Spinal Engine clearly demonstrated that movement doesn't originate from the legs or from the arms. It originates from the spine and the core muscles. So we've got to ensure that we have a supple thoracic spine to allow movement and correct biomechanics to happen. Now, when you consider what position you're in most of the day, so if you're sitting, driving to work, then you're sitting at a desk all day on a computer, driving home from work, sitting on the sofa, sitting at the dinner table. That's a lot of sitting, that's a lot of thoracic spine tension. And we need to unwind that tension on a daily basis because that will affect our performance, our breathing, can result in neck pain, shoulder mobility issues, lower back pain. But we can use foam rollers, peanut ball rollers, etc. to really help unlock the spine. So standard number 4, efficient squat. So basically the squat is the king of exercises. So if you can do a good squat, you've got to have good flexibility, good core control, good body awareness. You've got to be strong. But you find that most runners can't squat effectively. They're very stiff, very tight through the hips and lower back. So work on your squat pattern and that will really help your performance. Standard 5, hip flexion. It's a very simple test you can do at home. So if you see here, stand up, lift the knee to about 120 degrees. Then we've got the foot, which is about at 105 degrees or perpendicular ankle knee. And then see if you can hold that for 30 seconds to see if you've got proper function for the hip flexors. Now, if you don't, very often it can result in further problems lower down the chain. Then standard 6, we've got hip extension. So we need to ensure that our hip flexors, quads are nice and loose so that we can get enough extension as the leg in our running cycle, the back leg goes back further enough without affecting the position of the other hip and the other knee, as you can see in this diagram. So what would happen is if the hip flexor is tight on the right leg as it goes back, then the left knee will generally cave inwards. The ankle will roll inwards as well, and that's going to create a lot of tension and issues, can shred the tissues in the hip, knee and ankle and really create a lot of problems. Now, the average cadence is about 160 steps per minute or 1,200 steps per mile. At 8-minute mile pace, 50 miles a week, 50 weeks per year, that's about 3 million incorrect steps, wearing out joints and tissues at a fantastic rate. So you're not going to be able to run too long with these issues. So you can get runner's knee or patella tendonitis. So in this slide here, it shows you Jeptu, who's a fantastic athlete. I think she came second in the London Marathon last time. Phenomenal athlete, but biomechanically terrible. Now, if you can see here, this line going down her right thigh, where we've got this pattern of the knee rolling inwards, and then the ankle falling in as well, and the foot turning out. So this is really going to shred her ankle, knee and hip joints, probably give back pain as well. Now imagine how much better she could be if she was biomechanically optimized. She'd use less energy, she'd be more efficient, she'd reduce risk of injuries, and she'd get improved performance. Who knows, next time she might even win the London Marathon. This is the couch stretch, which is an exceptionally good stretch for working through the hip flexors and the quads. So I'd highly recommend working into this position. Standard 7, ankle range of movement. So to access the full power and elastic recoil, which is 17% from the arches, 35% from the Achilles, that's 52% energy return system. So we've got to make sure those ankles are working right. So we don't want them turned out too much like an overpronator. We want them to be neutral, and we don't want to be underpronating or supinating. So if you've got any restrictions here, you have to work to get these aligned correctly to allow you to run properly. Standard 8, warm up, cool down. So we've already said a little about this before. So if you've designated an hour for a run, it has to be minus the warm up and minus the cool down. So aim for 45 minutes for a run. And now there's no additional benefit to be gained by pushing the hour and then going straight back to the office and sitting down. Definitely make time to warm up properly and to cool down properly. Now, the greater the run, the longer the warm up and cool down should be. Standard 9, compression socks. So this is a really easy standard to achieve. I've used these for many years with great effect. I find that I recover a lot quicker. Calf tissues don't get as much tension in them, especially after a long run. So it's a really simple standard to achieve. Give them a try and see what you think. Standard 10, no hotspots. So we really need to be scanning the whole body, looking for the worst places that we have with trigger points, because these can affect the whole system. So if you see in the diagram on the left with the calf muscle, we've got the X's, which are the trigger points, and then the areas that they affect. But knowing that we have muscle sling systems and fascial systems that run the length of the body, a problem in the calf can then relate into the hamstring, the glute, up through the back muscles, all the way up to the back of the neck, because it can affect the whole system, and that's going to reduce your performance. So we need to be aware of what's going on in our bodies, and we need to scan frequently, at least every time before you're going out for a run, to make sure all these systems are functioning properly before you train. And you can think of it as like a red warning light on your car dashboard. So what would you do? Would you just keep driving and hope things are going to be okay? And remember that pain is how the body communicates with us, so ignore it at your peril. Standard 11, hydration. So it's really important for us to keep well hydrated. Even a small reduction in in dehydration in the body can make a large loss in performance. So it's estimated that during VO2 max testing, that dehydration of just 2% can equal a loss of performance up to 11%. And also we talked about those sliding tissues in the body, the muscles, the fascia, the skin, that all need to glide for us to feel comfortable and free as we're running. All of those systems need to be well hydrated. And when we're dehydrated, we get less blood circulation, less circulating oxygen, less nutrients, and less performance ultimately. Standard 12, jumping and landing. So if you think about running, it's basically just a series of jumps or hops really from one foot to the other. So we've got to be really good at being able to take off and to land in the correct position. So you can do this with 2 feet, as in the slide here, just getting ourselves to align our spine, align our knees, ankles, and landing, taking off and landing effectively with good biomechanics. We can also do this with single leg as well as you progress. And then as you can see in this slide, we've got neutral position with the ankle, knee, hip and spine. And then we've got valgus knees. This is where the knees are rolling in. And this is probably the most common compensation pattern I see. So if you're out running next time through the park, have a look at the people that are coming towards you or away from you and look at their knee positions. And very often you'll see at least 1 or 2 knees turning inwards. And this typically reflects collapsed arches, tight gastroc or soleus muscles, tight adductors, anterior hip angle and tight lower back. And these must be addressed. Okay, so the fundamental principles are, we've got lifestyle errors, so things like dehydration, the wrong footwear, sitting posture, will all result in mobility problems. So we'll get stiff, unhealthy tissues, get range of movement issues, we get hotspots in the muscles and the fascia, and then that relates to positional problems, and then ultimately movement problems as well. And we're unable to run without arches collapsing in and knees collapsing inward. And then ultimately performance problems. So we're going to get pain, injury, power loss. So we need to work on the worst things that you've identified, or the easiest things that there are for you to put into practice, and that's where there's most improvement in performance is waiting to happen for you. So how much easier and quicker will you run when you've cleared a few of the main issues? And how about all 12 of the standards? So be patient, take your time with this. Remember, do the warm-ups, do the cool-downs. Be creative, so at the home or the office, use some bands, balls, etc., whatever you can do, walk around bare feet. Test and retest, so before every time you go out for a run, have a little scan through the body, identify those hot spots, mobilize. Is it a yes or a no for a run today, or should you just do a mobility session? And then keep after it. So like good dental health, a little maintenance every day goes a long way. Okay, so thank you for joining me today, and I hope some of the techniques in here allow you to run stronger for longer and avoid injuries. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. So bonus section, mobility toolbox. So we can use various tools, techniques to really help improve our performance and avoid injuries. So firstly, we've got the voodoo bands, which provide compression, restricts blood flow and sticks the adhesions in the sliding surfaces through the muscle, the fascia and the skin. These are highly effective and they work almost immediately. So we can also use them, so if you do have any issues like a sprained ankle or knee problems for example, then don't ice but do voodoo. So ice is counterproductive. Ice will numb and decrease the pain, but at a cost. It shuts off communication between muscles and nerves, reverses lymphatic system, instead of decreasing inflammation, and may increase inflammation long term as well. And that will slow the healing process. The lymphatic system is designed to carry excess tissue fluid back to the cardiovascular system. And ice will increase vessel permeability, and fluid flows in the wrong direction from vessels to damaged tissues, including swelling and pressure and possibly more pain. Icing can congest tissues, and there's no medical textbook or clinical study supports the use of ice. Ibuprofen is even worse. Now, why would you want to override the natural inflammatory response? It's necessary in healing process, and without the inflammation, healing just won't occur. So we want to be doing the opposite of rice. We want to be doing movement without pain, of course, because it helps the lymphatic system begin the process of restoring the tissues. So a little bit of movement, a little bit of voodoo, and that will really aid the recovery. We can also use rollers for the larger muscles in the body. We can use lacrosse balls or tennis balls. These are exceptionally good for the little nooks and crannies, great for working through the feet, especially for plantar fasciitis issues and Achilles issues, Achilles tendonitis as well. We can use bands to get a bit of distraction in the joints. Very often the hip joints will get a bit glued up, especially if you're sitting all day, and the bands can be used in various ways to help just gap the joint, create a little bit of freedom in there, and loosen up the tissues. So I hope you've enjoyed this today. If you'd like to join me online at thrivehealth.fitness, we're on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all the usual places, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.